Super, thanks Alex, and I try to guide you through the call conditions of this particular call, which covers the 2023 period. So first, could you see the first slide moving, Alex? Or?
Yes.
Okay, so it went through, because sometimes it doesn't. So just before starting, there are a number of documents that you really have to read, which is, first of all, the RNI work program that you find on the web at the address, which is on top, the Smart Networks Europa WP contents, and that terminates with 24.pdf. This is really the root document that has at the same time the topics, very detailed as Alex presented them. So all the details of the topic, the scope, the expected impact, and this type of things. And it has inside the call conditions. And the call conditions, which I'm going to present, you find them page 42 onwards in this document, for which you have the link up there. And there is another important background reading where you will find a lot of answers to several of the questions which have been asked, which is the frequently asked questions, which we try to update as we get new questions. So far, we have got a number of questions in there, which are either related to things which are totally generic, so which apply the same from one call to the other. For instance, how you have to cover financial support to third party. This does not change from one call to the other. And there are other answers and other questions, of course, which are more related to this particular call, what is the scope of this particular topic and so on, where we try again to give as many details as we can. So in this document, this page 32 that I mentioned reads like that. So you have Appendix 1 at the top, additional conditions to the SNS 2023 call, and I will explain why it's called additional conditions, because there are a number of base conditions and additional conditions. So here you will find for this particular call the specific conditions that apply, and it says, I think it answers one of the questions in the chat. It says specifically that the call opens on 17th January 2023. When it says opens, it means that it's open for submission of proposal. It means that all the tools are ready for you to download the templates, start filling your documents, and start drafting your proposals, which will have to be submitted by the 25th of April at 1700, so 5 o'clock afternoon, for an overall indicative budget of 132 million, that the total call budget as was presented by Alex and by Pavlos. So call conditions, you have to understand there are several documents that apply to call conditions. The first root document is the so-called General Annexes for Horizon Europe Call Conditions 23-24. There was a document for 21-22, which has been superseded with a new version, which takes into account more specific things that emerged recently, such as participation of Ukraine or specific aspects which emerged over the last 2 years. So this is the baseline document. So we have the possibility either to apply the general set of conditions which are in this document, for which you have the URL where you can find this document on the screen. You will get access to these slides, so you will have the possibility to access these documents. But we have the flexibility in some specific cases, like the SNS call, because it's a specific initiative, to modify or to amend or to complement the provisions which are in these general as annexes, which are normally applicable to Horizon Europe calls at large. So we have, for the SNS undertaking, taken the decision to amend a little bit the call conditions on a number of topics which are listed here. So admissibility, eligibility. Eligibility means what you need to respect to have your proposal evaluated. For instance, one of the very specific eligibility conditions is that a proposal has to be submitted by a minimum of 3 partners from 3 different member states. If it's only 2 partners from 2 different member states, we don't consider it as an eligible proposal, so we don't go into the evaluation. These are the kind of eligibility conditions you find in the general annexes, but again, we have complemented it with specific clauses which are related to the membership of the consortium. So how the consortium has to be structured for specific proposal. Generation of ICOP, so this is something specific. If you participated in the previous call, you know what it is. If not, I will explain in more details. So SME participation has a specific condition, sovereignty aspects, security, and financial support to third party and collaboration between projects. So these are the core elements of the specific conditions. So admissibility, this is very simple. Normally, in Horizon Europe, default, let's say, rules, a proposal should be something like 45 pages for the Part B. Here, because we are dealing with specific topics, sometimes complicated, sometimes with large number of partners, we can go up to 100 pages. Does not necessarily mean that you have to design your proposal to be 100 pages. You can write it with a much lower number of pages if you want. It's absolutely not taken into account for the evaluation. If you want to make it only 60 pages, just make it 60 pages. If you believe you can do the case in 60 pages. So we take here a kind of indicative 70 pages for those proposals where you are very focused, you are handling one very specific technological element with maybe a restricted set of partners. Whilst if you have a more complicated proposal where you are addressing several technological elements with a larger number of partners, you can go up to the maximum number of 100 pages. But again, this is very much your choice. We take 100 pages as the maximum just to give you the flexibility to adjust within a range that you find is the more adapted to your particular case. Don't take this as, oh, if my proposal doesn't go up to 99 pages, I will not be considered as a serious proposal. Or don't go into this. On the contrary, the shorter you make it, the more the evaluators will be in a good mood because they will have much less work to read the proposal. And for the CSAs, which is a societal CSA that was mentioned before, we have a range, maximum number of pages of 50 pages, which is again departing from the 45 pages canonical limitation of Horizon Europe. Now, in terms of eligibility, we have a set of rules, additional rules, that apply to specific topics. So here, you have the number of topics which are opened in this call, and you can see that the various topics are indicated with different colors. So for those topics which are in yellow, that means the microelectronics-based solutions for 6G networks and the complementary SNS experimental pan-EU federated infrastructure, gosh, I made it. We have a restriction that says that at least half of the budget should go into, let's say, partners which are 6GIA members. Why? Because this is an incentive to generate ICOPs. All the restrictions we are putting on top in eligibility are in view of generating additional ICOP. I will explain what ICOP are, but it's in view of generating additional private financing, which is not covered by the public financing. So if you want, it's a tool to stimulate investments outside of the public investments, which is one of the rules that the Commission is applying to try not to have everything financed by the public side, but also to use this as a leverage to stimulate and generate additional funding that comes from outside of the public money that comes from the Commission, and that's private money. So these restrictions, they apply to the two yellow topics. That means that, again, half of the budget should go to members of the 6GI association. And for the Stream D topic, the idea is that the full budget should be covered by 6GIA partners. For all the others in white, it can include non-6GIA membership, but with an additional condition on the ICOPS, and I'm going to explain what it is. For the SNS Societal Challenge CSA, there is no restriction. That means that the restrictions, the classical rules for participation that you find in the general annexes apply. Now, when it comes to drafting your proposal, how do we measure that half of the budget goes into 6GIA members? Well, this is based on a self-declaration, so you will have to indicate in your proposal that this condition is satisfied. For the two projects, for the two topics in yellow, and full budget to 6GIA members for the Stream D topic, again, it's completely free for you to be part of the 6GIA, so you can be there. So in kind, when I say it's free, I mean it's open. Everyone can be member of 6GIA, so it's not a restrictive, too restrictive condition. In-kind contribution to operational cost. Now, I explain what it means. It's not an eligibility criterion, it's an award criterion, which means that we potentially take it into account in the evaluation process. So what are ICOPs, in-kind contribution to operational activities? They are contributions by private members which are not covered by the financing of the public body, which is the Commission in that case. So in some cases, I will explain, we only reimburse, for instance, partners in a consortium, not to 100%, but to 90% or to less. In that case, for instance, to give you an example, if we reimburse a member of a consortium at 70%, for instance, the additional money this partner has to put on the table, which is 30% of the cost, which are not paid by the Commission, are considered as ICOP, because these are considered as investments by the partners, which are which are private investments, which are not covered by the public bodies. To be considered as ICOP, still, there is a rule that says this additional 30%, or these 30% which are paid by this partner in the consortium, they have to be paid by someone who belongs to the 6G Infrastructure Association, because this is our partner in the JU, if we have to count them as part of the ICOP. If it is put on the table by the partner which is not part of the 6G Infrastructure Association, this self-investment by this partner will not be considered as ICOP, and that's the reason why we need to promote participation from, in some cases, from partners from the 6G Industry Association. So for this call, we have set out of the 138, sorry, something happened here. Out of the 132 millions of the call, we have targeted a minimum ICOP level of 8 millions. That means that out of the overall budget that we are going to finance, 8 million should be contributed not by the Commission, by investments from outside of the Commission, which corresponds to about 6% of the budget of the core. And here it says again, exactly what I said, is that ICOP can only be generated by entities belonging to the member other than the union. The member other than the union is the private signatory to the joint undertaking. So in that case, it's the 6G Infrastructure Association. So again, it's a tool to stimulate private investments. But so private entities belonging to the 6GIA, they will naturally generate ICOP because they are funded only to 90% or to 70%. So the 10% that they are not funded by the Commission in RIAs, or the 30% that they are not funded by the Commission in IAs, will be taken into account as contributing to the ICOP figure. And this is part of a specific impact sub-criterion, which you find again in the appendix that I mentioned, starting from page 42 of the work program text, which read extent to which the member of the proposed consortium contribute to the expected level of in-kind contribution to operational activities to help reaching the target additional investments. So there is a sub-criterion which takes that into account when the evaluation of the proposal is coming to the table. And it's one out of many, so it's not necessarily the determining factor, but it can play a role. For the non-restricted topics, or non-semi-restricted topics, so the topics that I mentioned before, which were in a yellow background or in a blue background, this target corresponds to about 2.6% of ICOP versus the overall reimbursed budget for the projects which are submitted. So it means that you have to target, if you want to reach this in average, you have to target 2.6% ICOP as part of your proposal. I will not explain how this figure is computed. It's based on the fact that those restricted or semi-restricted proposals will already generate a certain part of the ICOPs, and then we distribute the rest on the, let's say, open type of proposals, those which are not restricted or semi-restricted. And we take into account, let's say, the kind of history that we have in terms of proposal shapes or structures. We use also the ICOP level to break the ties between equally marked proposals. So that's one possibility, sorry. And the ICOP percentage level of the proposal, when you draft your proposal, it is to be specified in table 3.1k of part B. So when you draft part B, you will find in section 3 a request to fill out a table which is a 3.1k, where you will say exactly who from the 6GIA generates ICOP and what is the overall percentage of ICOP which is reached by this particular proposal. We have a target in the award criteria, which is the one for SME participation. So in general, we have 20% participation at program level. That's our objective. Again, there is in the expected impact criterion. I'm not sure it's in the, yes, it's in the evaluation table, an SME specific impact sub-criterion, SME participation and opportunities to leverage project results. So this is also included in the table of evaluation criteria. Of course, SME participation has to be designed according to the specific nature of the project. In some cases, it makes sense. In some cases, it makes less sense. So it can be accepted that there are less SMEs in some specific projects because the subject itself does not lend itself to have participation of SMEs. It's really up to the proponents to define what has to be the level for their specific proposal. And again, the SME budget is used to break ties between equally marked proposals when we come to the panel level. So when we have the individual scoring and the individual assessment of all the proposals, we bring that to a panel. So we rank the proposal. And if proposals are ranked with exactly the same rank, with the same marks for the three criterions, which are excellence, impact, and consortium composition, we run a process to break the ties. So here you have the process, the way we have complemented it. So it's not exactly the same thing that you find in the general annex. It's the same thing as what you find in the general for the first two steps. So the first two steps are the same. We look first for RIA, we look first as the excellence criterion. If the excellence criterions are the same, we move to the impact criterion. If the impact criterion is still the same, then we move to the next step, and here we look at the level of SME participation. And if they are still the same, for instance, 0, for there is no SME in the two proposals, we go to the level of ICOP. And still, if the level of ICOP is the same, then we resume the normal process as it is specified in the general annexes, which is, if I remember well, the next step is into gender issues, I believe. I'm not sure, but I think it's gender issues related. So the participation in terms of female representatives. And to break the ties for two proposals equally ranked but innovation actions, it's the same, except that the first two steps are not the same, because for innovation action, we start with the impact criterion first. So if the two proposals have the same marks for the impact criterion, we move to the excellence criterion. And if still the mark is the same, then we go into the level of SME participation and so on. So that's the way we have slightly modified the evaluation rules. Now, sovereignty aspects, and there was a question on that which was related to non-EU headquartered companies or something like that, if I remember well. So the text says that we are looking for a reinforced European leadership, and of course we expect to contribute to ensure European sovereignty for a number of critical supply chain. And we have introduced a sub-criterion which reads, as you have at the bottom of the slide, EU added value in the context of EU's supply-side industry competitiveness and positioning in the supply chain. So we are clearly intending to support the EU industrial supply side, that's not only the EU side, but also the supply side, which does not mean that it precludes participation of non-EU suppliers. Of course, we can have non-EU suppliers in proposals, as we have had over the last decades, several decades of work program in telecoms. But it means it needs to be made a little bit sure, maybe clear in the proposal, that the EU supply side benefits, has a strong benefits, even if the non-EU supply side has benefits from participating in this proposal and in exploiting the results. For instance, if you have a proposal where the result exploitations goes primarily towards the non-EU suppliers, this will raise questions. This will it will not necessarily rule out the proposal, but it will open a discussion at the level of the panel or at the level of the consensus meeting, I don't know, to know if there is really a contribution, a clear added value in terms of EU suppliers. So for Stream D, which is the large-scale pilots with verticals, we have introduced a slightly modified version of the evaluation procedures, because we have two types of use cases which are supposed to be covered by this Stream D stuff. And so the first use case is really on connected and automated mobility, vertical and intelligent terrestrial transportation. So it's something which is very specific to automotive sector and transportation sector, which can cover railways also as well. So it's not necessarily cars, but really something which is in the transport domain. And the other one, the use case priority 2, is a little bit more open, with a few use cases like health, farming, education, which are not so well covered in the first call, as Pavlos explained. But since all these use cases are encapsulated under one single budget, there is a risk that the 2 or 3 proposals that reach the top of the ranking list cover only one use case. In that case, we don't satisfy the conditions of the call. So what we do is that we will have a call evaluation procedures that make sure that we take the first one of the ranking list, which is going to cover one particular use case, and the second one will be selected in the ranking list, even if it's a little bit further down the list, will be the one that covers the complementary use case in such a way that we have full coverage of the call in the selection process. And that's the reason why it's important that when you apply, you clearly identify which priority, that means which use case you are targeting with your proposal, in such a way that we know if you are in the first set or if you are in the second set, if you are in the first batch or in the second batch. So we have a specific security clause in the stream D also, because stream D being a little bit more closer to deployment, there is, let's say, a kind of a generic move in the Commission to be maybe a little bit more attentive to things which are closer to the market, and maybe I wouldn't say a little bit less open, but a little bit more attentive, as I said. So for those proposals which are covering this kind of large-scale pilots, it's important for us that the equipments which are put in the test beds and which are supporting the test, especially if these are equipments which are close to commercialization, because you may use in a large-scale test beds equipments which are commercial or close to commercial. It's important for us that the security and the protection of this, the knowledge corresponding to these equipments is safeguarded. So we have identified two cases, but there may be more. For instance, a test infrastructure is connected to an operational network or using resources from an operational network. So in that case, it's particularly important to protect the equipments which are related to the operational network implementation. Or we can have a large-scale test infrastructure which is standalone, not connected to an operational network, but utilizes close to commercial equipment connectivity. And in that case, it's also important to secure this equipment and to make sure that specific information corresponding to these equipments is not unduly exposed to entities, as it says in the call, entities not established in member states or controlled from third countries. So this aspect is taken into account in the assessment. So it means that as part of the security declaration, the proposal shall contain information that demonstrate that the infrastructure deployed within the proposed project shall remain during the action and for a specified period within the beneficiary. It shall not be subject to control or restrictions by entities not established in member states or controlled from third countries. So that's just the text that I reuse from the call text. And also, it has to demonstrate that for equipments that to be deployed for the implementation of the projects, the required document information results will be duly protected and not exposed to entities not established in member states or controlled from third countries. So that's the idea, is that sensitive information corresponding to either the equipments which are deployed in these pilots or generated or used for these pilots are not exposed to non-EU entities. So this is made by using the part A and the annex. So first in the text here, it says that we will ask the evaluators to review under the impact criterion if there is a risk such that what I exposed, and how the consortium plans to address such risks if there are such risks. So in the part A, there is a security issue table that has to be filled for all the proposals anyway. So you may want to complement that in part A under the second question of item 3 in the table, other security issues. You may want to specify here that there are potentially stream D related issues, but because there are limitations of text, we suggest that, or we propose that you put it in the mandatory security annex to part B. So you will find when you download the templates to design part B of the proposal, there is a mandatory security annex that you can fill out to explain how you will mitigate the risk and how you will address it. Again, if it makes sense, because sometimes maybe there is no risk to be covered, and in that case, it can be very simple. So financial support to third party is something also that generated or raised a lot of questions for the previous call. So here we have tried to be a little bit more specific. So FSTP applies to Stream D. So that means that when you design a Stream D proposal, the large-scale pilots for verticals, innovation actions, you will have to submit it, as I said, with a number of partners, which are all from the 6G Infrastructure Association. But you can leave part of the budget open, up to 20% of the budget open, to complement the consortium later through cascading grants or through additional call for proposals, which will be completely open. It does not be this 20%, if it is up to 20% that you put in reserve to generate cascading grants. You can take on board additional companies, SMEs or whatever, which are not 6GIA members. So it's only the root proposal that you will insert at the level of this call, which has to be 6GIA partners inside. It says up to 20% because we had this question in the past, so it can be less, but we would suggest that you try to stick to the 20%. This is because this is something that we have identified as interesting, to have the possibility to have these large-scale pilots being complemented by additional features as time goes by. And we have been a little bit more precise for the eligible topics that could be subject to such future cascading grants. So either for the network and service test infrastructure that you are considering at the level of the proposal, you want to add in the future extra 6G technological capabilities as they become available, because now you might have a number of possibilities which are not completely mature to be inserted, but later when time comes, they may be, let's say, available for insertion. Or additional capabilities that you may need to support target use cases. Sometimes the technology is specific to the use case that you want to cover, not generic. The first bullet is more generic. The second is targeted to one particular use case that you may need a specific capability to cover a specific use case. Or you may want to open your platform later downstream to additional vertical use cases. So that's proposed to be an eligible topic. Expansion of stakeholder base as technology suppliers or users, or also another potentially interesting topic is expansion of the proposed work in terms of additional pilot sites. So you will have a proposal with a number of sites spread around Europe. You may want to get that complemented with other pilot sites, which may even come from other projects with whom you may want to team up, and this can stimulate the funding of the partnership between two projects covering different use sites or having different service capabilities. So the additional grants we have specified this time more specifically goes up to 300K, but in your proposal you have to explain why you need this money, because let's say the canonical budget that goes into cascading grant is 60K per additional partner. So you can go up to 200K, but you have to justify that in your proposal and how this covers the different type of activities and the criteria that you will give for financial support. And it says in the last line, it is recommended that the beneficiary providing third-party financing is an entity eligible for 100% of reimbursement of the eligible cost. So it means that when you make your proposal, this additional 20%, this additional budget, which is to be granted later, has to be associated to the cost of one particular partner. So if this one partner to which these costs are associated is eligible for 90%, the cascading grant will be only reimbursed at 90% or 70% if it's or less if it's eligible to less. So by making it such that this additional budget is hooked to a partner which is reimbursed 100%, you make sure that the cascading grants will be financed at 100%. So we have also cross-project collaboration. That means in the grant agreement, there is a clause that kind of impose the various proposals to cooperate with each other on subject of mutual interest. We don't specify ex ante the subject of mutual interest across the projects, but once the projects are contracted, they will have to work in working groups on dedicated topics such as, I don't know, architecture, standards, or security for 6G or whatever. And this is something that will be part to the contract. So if this is not in your intention, if you want to work in a standalone project that doesn't take into account the rest of the world, it's not a good sign for us. So you better specify explicitly in your proposal that you agree to enter into a collaborative mode with the other proposals that will be subcontracted. So this finishes this presentation.